All right. Well, good afternoon. Today we are going to talk about exploring the HiSET program in 2024. And today I am joined by Rebecca Reed, who is our HiSET program manager, and I'm Stephanie Bauer, and I am the HiSET account manager. What we're going to talk about today during this presentation, first is a HiSET Right for My Student. We'll get into a little bit of HiSET exam overview information. We will talk about the accommodations process for students. We will talk about resources to support students. And then we will talk about pathways post HiSET. Our session is meant to be very interactive. We're happy to take questions whenever it's appropriate inside our session. Rebecca is also here to monitor the chat. And if there's something that's particularly salient to what we're talking about in this moment, Rebecca will go ahead and stop me so we can address it where it is. Jumping right into our first topic for today of is HiSET right for my student? There are a few things to consider when determining whether or not you'd like to offer your student HiSET. The first item that we have here is the student is more comfortable taking a paper pencil test, which in Minnesota is with appropriate state approval. But HiSET has paper, computer, and live remote proctoring available for students. If the student would benefit from testing in the live remote proctor space, where it is authorized by the state, is another opportunity. And where the student would benefit from separating the reading and writing exams. So as I'll talk about in a second, HiSET is 5 exams, and we do separate the reading and writing exams. If the student is more comfortable taking the test in Spanish, HiSET does offer both English and Spanish exams. And if the student would benefit from an accommodations process that accepts educator letters for consideration during the approval process. And this has been a topic that we've talked a lot about on the road this year. So we'll dig into that a little later on inside the presentation. The first thing we want to talk about is the overall exam HiSET overview if folks are not familiar with HiSET. HiSET is 5 exams. And in comparison to GED, which is 4 exams, one easy way we kind of like to use this that another state has shared with us is you can think about HiSET as the high 5. So 5 exams. We have reading, which is 50 questions, and they are all multiple choice. In reading, there is 65 minutes for the English exam that's allotted and 80 minutes for the Spanish exam that's allotted. It's the only one that has a difference in English and Spanish timing. And then we have the writing exam, which is 61 questions, and it has 60 multiple choice questions as well as an essay. Mathematics is 55 questions, and they are all 100% multiple choice, and it's at 90 minutes. Science has 60 questions, 100% multiple choice at 80 minutes. And finally, social studies, which is 60 questions, which are also multiple choice questions, and it's at 70 minutes. So if someone were very aggressive and wanted to take all of the HiSET exams in one day, the HiSET total test time is just over 7 hours. But certainly we do not recommend people force all the tests within one day. For our passing scores, the subtests for the HiSET are all scored on a 20-point scale. So you must score at least 8 out of 20 on each subtest. And just remember that the writing subtest is in 2 parts. So in order to pass, you need to have at least a 2 on the writing subtest, as well as the overall score of 8. The student must achieve a total combined score of 45. And so that just means a score higher than the minimum passing score on at least one of the subtests is needed for them to be able to pass the full battery. HiSET does acknowledge college and career readiness scores, and while it is still on the 20-point scale, a test taker earns the career and college readiness designation if they have a 15 or above on the subtests, and for the writing subtest, it needs to be at least a 4. So that's where the career and college readiness designation will start for the HiSET scores.
Hey, Steph.
Yes.
Sindra has her hand raised. I don't know if you had a question. Or maybe just working with the tools.
Awesome.
Sorry, I do not have a question.
Oh, okay.
Perfect. We'll move on to talk a bit about HiSET accommodations. They are available for test takers with diagnosed disabilities. And we have the most common ones listed below, and I won't read the list to you, but they are there. These are our most common approved accommodations, but they are not limited to just those accommodations. There is a hyperlink that is embedded inside this presentation and will be available that will go directly to our HiSET.org accommodations page, which will have the full list and is a wealth of additional information on accommodations. We do have quite an extensive list of accommodations that do not need pre-approval. And so on this list, I'll call out the ones that are most commonly known as comfort aids. So you'll see them marked with an asterisk, so earplugs. If any of you have seen us in person in any of the events that HiSET's at, that is actually one of our giveaways. We provide earplugs as one of our giveaways, and I am not sure why this slide is just moving on its own, so I'm going to move it right on back. Handheld non-electronic magnifying device, so without memory or a camera. So anything that can magnify the text for the text taker. And service animals as well as medical devices, so an inhaler, a hearing aid, an insulin pump. Any of those types of things are commonly do not need pre-approval and are considered comfort aids for your test takers. We do have accommodations that require approval, and that needs to be pre-approved and then scheduled by our accommodations department. The most common ones that we have are asterisks on this slide, and they include extended time, a separate room, large print, screen magnification, and additional break time. So those are the most common accommodations that are requested that do require some approval. Again, there's a very exhaustive list available on HiSET.org, but we wanted to make sure in the small amount of time that we did have to talk with everyone that we hit the high points. There's very typical documentation that's used and can be submitted with the application for accommodations. And test takers or whoever is designated as their advocate can submit this documentation on the form. It's typically verification from a medical authority or learning institution that rendered the diagnosis, and it needs to be submitted to our accommodations department on letterhead or stationery of that authority or specialist, and it needs to include the test taker's name, the description of disability or limitations, and again, I've got a haunted screen, related to testing, the recommended accommodation or modification, the name, title, and telephone number of the medical authority or specialist, and the original signature of the medical authority or specialist. And in this little peach box here, I've kind of outlined one phrase. In some cases, a letter from the adult educator working closely with the test taker will be considered. And so that's something we'll kind of look at on the next few slides. As always, if you do fail to submit the required documentation during that approval process, there will be a back and forth, which will cause a delay. So we've got to make sure that we have all the documentation in order. So we will go back and forth until we do have everything in order to approve. What you see on the screen right now is very much a redacted example of an educator letter. We're going to dig into more of the specific text on the next slide, but this is actually a picture example of an educator letter that was submitted to our accommodations department and was successfully approved to allow an accommodation for extended time for a test taker. So the annotations just kind of point out where inside the letter we have all of the required areas. It also gives a guide We certainly don't intend this to be a word-for-word template that's used by every educator, but we did get a lot of feedback as we were in the field where folks said, hey, I'd like to be able to advocate for my student, but I'm just not sure what the right sequence of information, what the information is needed. And so we decided to find some of the educator letters that were successfully approved to kind of give a little bit more guidance. The accommodations team was a little nervous when I asked for these letters because they were a little afraid that they would get exact carbon copies of the letter. But I think it's more about giving everybody a general idea so they can craft the language on their own that is very much specific and very much dedicated to the specific student that they are talking about. So I'm going to put everybody on the honor system that we won't go word for word exactly what's in the letter, but we will use this as a nice, helpful guideline to really pick through what would be appropriate information to share in order to get your student the consideration necessary for approval. So because it's kind of an eye chart, when you look at the previous slide, I've kind of picked out little phrases and went through and put check boxes in there to guide the process along. So submit on official letterhead. Although some of it was obscured by my redaction activities on the previous slide, it was submitted on official letterhead. And it did include the title and experience of the educator that submitted it. And just to give you a feel for what we might be looking for here, from the actual letter, I serve as a lead instructor at the Adult Education Center, and I'm also an educational consultant. I've worked with a wide range of students ages 10 to 70 with varying goals and learning patterns, frequently with students challenged by ADD, ADHD, dyslexia, anxiety, and other challenges. So we're getting a feel for the level of experience this educator has and whom they've worked with. The next box is indicate the accommodation requested. And the educator asked in a couple different places. Application for extended time should receive full and unequivocal support. And please grant the student time and a half or double time for his HiSET subtests. This educator in the next space included a lot of helpful information about the student, about the challenges, and about some of the things that the student has worked through in his HiSET journey. That's something that can be included in additional information, and some snippets from this letter include, is a highly analytical and detailed thinker who tends to overthink while preparing due to his lack of confidence, and she shared more information about that in the letter. Experiencing extreme test anxiety and makes it difficult to focus. With extra time, the student could pass his HiSET subtest and has completed several official practice tests and receives strong scores, but often fails to answer all of his questions. Can be corrected if he's granted additional time. Now, there were some other personal things inside the letter that really also wrapped around these kind of thoughts, but this is at the highest level. And again, we wanted to step away from being most specific about some of the experiences from the student, but we pulled out some of the phrases that really spoke to what is making this a barrier and what extra time could do to support this student. The last item on the checklist, of course, is to provide the full contact information. And so that's really kind of dissecting the pieces of the educator letter.
Hey, Steph.
Yes,
We have a question in the chat, and I thought it would be good for the entire group to hear.
of course.
So is having an untimed test an accommodation option with HiSET or only a specifically requested extended time frame?
So right now, a fully untimed test is something that would need to be approved and would only be something that could happen if it is on a paper pencil test. If it is a computer-based test, there is no method for us to be able to block more than double time for that test taker. And when we say untimed test, we also have to really be careful and think about what we're granting in that space, because it would have to fit into whatever the test center had an availability to do. Certainly that test would not be something that's an extensive amount of hours that's even beyond what the test center would be able to operate. So that would require a lot of coordination. It is certainly a possibility, but a possibility that would have to have a lot of different considerations thought through and worked through before final approval would be granted. That was a very long-winded answer, but certainly one that would reflect the level of interaction that we would need to get this right, and also the limitation on a untimed test in that space. Did that answer your question?
Yep, you got it.
Perfect. Thank you for the question.
Thanks, Steph.
Anything else in the chat to address before we move forward?
Nope, we can keep going.
Sounds like a plan. Accommodations approvals. So once all the documentation has been fully reviewed and received, the test taker is going to get an email notification from our accommodations department. So the approval email will include instructions to contact the accommodations team for scheduling. There are very few accommodations that are scheduled that can be scheduled by the test taker themselves. More often than not, it is our accommodations team that will work with a test center to schedule an accommodation. This is also, well, actually, I'll talk about this in scheduling. These things all go hand in hand. If not initially approved, the email will give guidance on what additional information we're looking for in order to approve the request. Sometimes it's incomplete documentation and it's just that a page has not been scanned and we need all the pages. Sometimes it's different information that's going to be requested. But if it is not initially approved, the email will give them guidance on what else should be attached to move forward. It's very important to note that accommodations approvals or requests for additional information go to the email that's specified on the request form. Currently, our request form does not allow multiple email addresses. So if it is the student who is requesting the accommodation on behalf of themselves, it will go to their email address. If it is someone at the test center or an advocate who has requested the accommodation, it will go to that email address. I know that there has been some confusion in the past where those informational emails go, and if there could be more emails added to it, it is something that we have taken feedback on, but currently the information goes to the email address that was used on the request form. For accommodation scheduling, our staff will coordinate with the preferred test taker and the test taker and advocate to get the exam scheduled. Again, test takers should not self-schedule unless they've been asked to by the accommodations team, and that's a rarer occurrence. One of the things that's very important in the scheduling of an accommodations exam is to make sure that the preferred test center that the test taker is looking for has, first of all, that accommodation available. And second of all, if they have the accommodation available, if it is open on the time that they are most interested in taking the exam. A lot of times the test center will have an accommodation available, but it had already been pre-scheduled. So we need to go back to the test taker and let them know that on the date and time that's most preferred by the test taker, it's not available. It could be available at this location, or they could wait for a different time for their preferred location to be open. That is also something in our travels over the field this summer that we've heard a lot of feedback on. And one of the things that now as we're presenting, now between here and the end of the year, we wanted to make sure that we reiterated that a lot of times we do our very best to get the test taker, the test center that they're looking for, but we also have to make sure that test center has the accommodation, number one, available, and number two, available at the preferred time for the test taker. When they do get an email for assistance, they can email right back or contact the accommodations team via our phone number. There is a specialized phone number for accommodations. And we do add notes inside the test taker's file during that scheduling to indicate what their approved accommodations are. So when in doubt, we are able to look inside the test taker's file and see all of that information. When the test taker is scheduled, the test center gets a notification via an email that's a short memo format, and it gives all the candidates' scheduled date, time, and approved accommodations information. So that will go to the test center once all of that information is completed. The next thing we want to talk about is HiSET practice tests. So there are free, paid, and official practice tests that are available to HiSET test takers. The free practice test, which is FPT, and answer sheets are downloaded directly from our HiSET website. And in March of this year, we released our most current free practice test, which is Free Practice Test 8, and that is available on HiSET.org. The free practice tests are all half length. So it will be a half length indicator of what the test taker would experience. Paid practice tests, which are in paper format, can be purchased through the online PSI store. And then we have official practice tests that can be purchased by state agencies or adult education programs. Those are the only two programs that can purchase these official practice tests. And right now they are half length. However, early this fall, and maybe still later this summer, because we still have months left, we still have time left in the summer, 2 new official practice tests will be available that are full length. So we will have 1 full length paid and 1 full length official practice test that will be available. They will be available on the PSI online store. And then the computer-based version of our official practice tests are available with our partner and through our partner, Essential Education. There is a hyperlink that is embedded into this presentation, which will take you right to the HiSET practice tests page. So that's a quick way to get to the main page and then be able to kind of flip through or dissect some of the other information that's necessary once you get to that page. The HiSET website has several resources. Right now, Test Center and Adult Educator resources are on the same tab. Future state, we will have separate tabs because we do know our test centers and adult educators will have similar but separate needs. So that's a future enhancement that will be coming to our website. But for right now, you'll see the navigation tabs on HiSET.org that show for test takers or for test centers and adult educators. So you would use the drop-down list for test centers and adult educators to get to different resources. So you'll see the resources are split up: computer-based resources, paper-based resources, and test taker support resources. So there's a lot of different things that are there. There are procedure docs, there are how-to flyers, as well as some additional training materials. So it's got a conglomeration of everything within that tab. Some of the most important and some of our favorite resources are available in that tab, and it includes our HiSET Test at a Glance, which is one of my favorites. And in our next slide, it will give you direct links to both the English and Spanish versions and dig into a little of the 3 things that are most important inside that resource. But you can also find our HiSET Study Companion, which is a great kind of outline on what things that your test takers can study. We have the Are You Ready to Take the HiSET Exam, which is a companion to the free practice tests or other practice tests. It will give you score ranges, and in those score ranges, it will tell you if you are indeed ready to go and take your full HiSET, or if there's other preparation that you will need before taking it. We also have scored writing responses, sample responses there. So we'll give you an idea of what a score 0.2 looks like versus a score 0.6. We have, of course, the official math formula sheet. Our test taker bulletin, which we always recommend test takers take a minute and read through, just to make sure they understand all of the different policies and all of the different things that they'll need to do to prepare before they get into their test session. And then we have other flyers that talk about the benefits overall of taking the HiSET. That's really good as a resource to use in test taker discussions. Those resources and many more are on the hyperlinks that are found on this presentation. So there are test taker support resources that are hyperlinked and test taker downloadable resources that are also hyperlinked inside the presentation. Now, I mentioned one of the most favorite HiSET resources that we have. And very honestly, this is my favorite resource because it's a nice, comprehensive, but not overwhelming document. We take this test at a glance very frequently to in-person conferences. The test at a glance has what's on the test overall and has the content categories. It talks about how they're assessed, so the process categories, and then why it's assessed, which is the CCRS descriptors. So it's really a nice, compact, comprehensive overview. And we did put hyperlinks inside the presentation directly to the English test at a glance, as well as the Spanish test at a glance. Because we're not, we'd like to be able to speak to all audiences, and occasionally there are adult educator and test center audiences that come to our presentations. We do have a dedicated resource document hyperlink page for test centers in specific. So all of these items here that you see on the screen are hyperlinked, but overall it's the HiSET program manual, which is really a test center Bible of information. It's all the processes and procedures and additional information that's necessary to administer the HiSET exam in all formats. Also has the test center computer specifications. So if you are currently in other states where there are centers that are only paper-based tests, it's good for them to be able to take a peek at what the computer specifications are to make sure that they can transition their center. Or for states that are primarily computer-based, it gives them an idea and some additional information for any new centers that might want to join the HiSET Test Center Network. What kind of computer specifications are needed in order to be one of our test centers? There are process documents very specific on how to pull rosters for future test dates, how to schedule and pay for test takers on their behalf, how to print receipts. It's a test taker's guide. There will be links to the HiSET sign-in sheet, how to assign paper-based test forms if you are administering a paper form, and any pre-provisioning if paper is something that's being done. And then also additionally processes on how to administer paper without internet access. But again, very specifically for paper-based test. And we do know that paper in Minnesota is based on state approval. So it is likely not the most common format, but something we always like to make sure that people have information and access to.
And Stephanie, this is Brandy with the Department of Ed team. And if you have questions on that paper-based testing, we have that policy up on the HiSET's website to see if you and your student meet eligibility.
Thank you, Brandy. I've tried to put it in there enough times that we know that it's always within approval flow.
Thanks so much.
Of course. Once a test taker passes the HiSET, there are infinite amount of opportunities that will be available to the HiSET test taker. They could go into a trade school, a community college, a four-year college, or they could get a new job that had previously required an equivalency credential or high school diploma. From that, they could go right into some job training. They could get their degree. They could graduate into professional schools, professional degrees, including their doctorate or graduate degrees. Or they could just continue their growth path onto a bachelor's degree and end up in a job that maybe has been their dream job, but required a little bit of additional education. So there are so many pathways that HiSET battery passers can get into. It opens a world of opportunity and some great options for all of our test takers. The other thing that we wanted to share is that some of our test takers will continue with HiSET and PSI services after they've passed the battery, because we do have several certifications that are also in the PSI family. So PSI has state licensing exams for more than 30 professional licenses. We do national certifications for boards, registries, and associations. So medical, dental, health, construction. We do one for FAA drone piloting, and then other certifications. So there are different ways that HiSET battery passers can still continue their familiar relationship with PSI, and some of those certifications on their path to their next opportunity could be one of those things. We do have other opportunities to see HiSET on the road. This year, rather than a national conference, we've decided to do road shows. We did our first road show in June in Sacramento, and we have a couple more road shows that are happening this year. They are a full day of all things HiSET. The program starts out with a general session led by our Vice President, Tanya Haug, and we share a lot about history of HiSET. We are celebrating our 10th birthday, so we are very excited about that. We talk about different things that have happened over the testing year, what we see on the horizon. We have breakfast and lunch networking opportunities with colleagues, as well as the afternoon, which is dedicated to nice compact sessions of breakouts. And we repeat the program as much as possible for both of the time slots for the breakout sessions. So we can make sure any of the topics that are very interesting to some of our educators or test centers, they're able to catch if they're trying to catch another session during that time slot. It's been a very exciting thing for us to plan and work through. If you're interested in more information, it's available on our events page from hiset.org. It's also hyperlinked below on this slide, or you can email us at the HiSET events email if you're interested in attending. It's not necessarily focused on the states that are that we have the events in. We had attendees in California from a variety of different states, so we welcome everyone who is interested in a full day of all things HiSET. We also have 3 social media channels, and we absolutely love to promote adult education programs, our graduates. We like being able to connect. This past May and June, we did the HiSET virtual graduation, and one of the things that we loved is HiSET graduates could enter a contest to win one of 2 $250 Amazon gift cards. And they were able to tell their HiSET story and submit a picture, and we were able to celebrate them. We celebrated the winners as well as some of the great entries that we got, and it is certainly one of my favorite times of year. HiSET virtual graduation is one of those things that just fills everyone's cup. So please send us information if you'd like to be featured on one of our social media channels. One of the really cool things that we have recently started to do is the HiSET question of the week. We got feedback at a previous conference that they really missed getting that HiSET question of the week because they used it as warm-ups in their class sessions. And so we were able to bring that back. And now I'm kind of addicted to look and see what the question of the week is. So if there are other thoughts or suggestions or recommendations on how we can put other things out on our social media channel to enrich the experience, please, please, please let us know. We are always happy to take suggestions. And now we have come to the part of the presentation where we are specifically ready to take questions. That's the end of our prepared material, but we are more than happy to take questions. We've left ample time to give some folks some time to chat before we have to transition to our next events. So please let us know what we can answer.
Hey, Steph, we have a few questions in the chat.
Okay.
All right. So if an accommodation is approved for one PSI product, is that usable for another assessment within the system?
So that's a very tricky question. So I will answer it in two ways. So if they are approved for HiSET, they are approved for all the tests within the HiSET battery. For any other PDSI product or certification, it's going to be very specific based on the rules for that particular certification. There are some clients that have a wider range of accommodations are available, or some that have a more narrow focus. So while you may have been approved for all 5 HiSET battery tests, it's better to apply specifically for the certification that you may be applying to, because there might be more or less available depending on the client rules. That was a really great question, and I'm so happy that someone has asked that. That's the first time I've gotten to answer it, but I have known the answer for quite a long time.
We have another question, 2 parts. Is a calculator which is offered to take the HiSET, the Casio, it's very specific, CFX 260?
Oh my.
I know.
So on our CBT functions, it is a basic 4-function calculator. Brandy, typically when we are talking about calculators, it's one of those things that also is up to the discretion of the state. Is that the brand and type of calculator that is approved by the state within Minnesota?
That is a very good question. Right off the top of my head, I don't know the specific brand, but like you mentioned, 4-function calculator, that we have seen individuals that come in with ones that hold formulas, and then of course the TA will clear all functions and clear history. So it's just that 4-functioning calculator that they can use.
Thank you. I appreciate the help.
Thank you.
And then also, I have a question this is from Brent. I'm seeing 50 multiple choice math questions, not 55. Is it 55? Is it 55 like you said? And I'm not sure where you're looking to get the 50 is really my question. Online. At a computer-based test? At a practice test? If you want to go ahead and come off mute, Brent.
Yeah, that would be helpful.
Okay.
And I will take a look.
Yeah, I was not sure about if it's computer-based or not, but I have seen since the onset of the HiSET, the discrepancy between 50 and 55, and I'm not certain if I'm seeing that rectified yet. I just want to know so I can tell anybody that's interested, how many they would have.
Nope, that is a great question. And luckily, I have easy access to taking a peek. So indulge me for one
I can tell you, as I'm Googling it currently, it does come up as 50 multiple choice questions in 2 different instances.
Indeed.
Quick Google search.
Oh yeah, I am. I'm actually going like right to the source, and I'm pulling our forms. I have that magic access, so I'm gonna check that right now. So you will get on in the moment actual information. That's a great question. And if that's the case, I'm looking at all of the forms as well.
We have a question from Sarah Nelson. Do all Minnesota community colleges recognize HiSET, and do employers?
Stephanie, do you want me to assist with that one?
That would be great, Brandy.
So we are currently always in conversations with the Minnesota universities as well as the other higher education institutions. HiSET is nationally recognized just like the GED. So it's more of just the conversation of them understanding, especially when they do get transcripts that mirror just like the GED from our department. When it comes to employers, that is a program and community responsibility to kind of assist in the language, because employers may have never heard of HiSET. So as we get the language out there, workforce development boards, as well as working with DEED, it is beneficial to you and your community to kind of let them know what HiSET is, as well as how it is equivalent to and is the same as.
And then
Okay.
additionally, Brandy, I think this might be for you as well. Additionally, have there been conversations with the Minnesota State Colleges about placement numbers? Like GED scores indicate different placements.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So the Men's State is working, some institutions still continue to use pre-assessments to place students, especially with co-recs coming out. And some are allowing students either transcripts and or GED scores assist with placement. So that really is an institution specific question. I know that when I was working at the program level, assisting students into college, we would look at either their registrar and their admissions and kind of talk through. Because like we say, we don't see college and career ready plus scores being utilized. But we do see a slow uptick of them understanding what those scores mean and how to assist in placement. So it really is the individual institution each time.
Thank you.
Yes, Brandy, thanks for the assist. I love having a nice phone a friend immediately available. And I just answered this inside the chat, but it is 55 questions verified on the exam for math.
Yeah, I think some of the sources online are not HiSET or PSI sources that say 50.
But it was a great question, and I had
Yep.
the means to check it out immediately while we were in session. So woohoo for all of us.
That's all the questions we have in the chat. I don't know if anybody wants to come off mute and ask a question. We have a great group.
We do have a great group. This has been a nice group of questions, and we have stayed very much on our time because it looks like now it is about 28 after, and we are scheduled here for another 2 minutes. So we've got a couple more minutes if there are any more questions.
Stephanie, do you want to mention the onboarding of our testing centers in the state, because they are growing this year, as well as what we have? Because I know that a lot of individuals in the community want to know, are there options to send students to test?
Certainly, although I know that you've recently reached out to Jay to get more information on the timeline for that, and we need him to follow up with us to confirm that. But we are looking to expand the test center network with inside Minnesota this year, which would include bringing on the PSI branded test centers for Minnesota. Let's see if I've got my hands on the quick list of potential towns. The one thing I didn't have up right handy, but let's take a look.
I know currently we have 7 that are actually working and implementing the HiSET test. Some of them are either detention centers or DOC, but there are 4 community-based centers currently that are accessible to anyone in the public.
And I thought I had that list handier than I do. So Brandy, we can get that list of expansion centers, cities or sites over to share, because I don't want to hold everyone up, and I have noticed that we are at time.
No worries. I can see just a couple of them are in Rochester, St. Paul, Wilmer, Woodbury, just to name a few.
Perfect.
So exciting news.
Very exciting. Well, we thank you very much for joining us today. It's been sincerely our pleasure to come and present at the virtual event. It's been wonderful, and thank you so much for your great questions, and let us know if there are any more questions post-session.